Hey Earthers! Welcome back to iWizard. Nikki here, and today I'll be reviewing Book 7 of the Expanse series by James S.A. Corey, which is Persepolis Rising. So join me around the blue light readers for this episode. Persepolis Rising was published in 2017, and I like to start these reviews by taking a look at the title because James S.A. Corey, who are Ty Frank, and Daniel Abraham, they really put a lot of thought in the title, and there's always a deeper meaning behind it. So if we just look at the word Persepolis, okay, it comes from Greek and it means Persian city. And Persepolis was a city that was constructed around 500 BC by Darius the First and was completed by his son, Xerxes the First. Additionally, there's this stairway that leads up Persepolis. It's the Persepolitan stairway, and it leads to the Gate of All Nations, which you can see in these ruins here. And it makes me think of the ring gate. So there's definitely already meaning there, just like it's like scraping the surface of this term. And then if you look even deeper, Persepolis was also meant to serve as a Persian capital city. And there were already 3 capital cities, one of which was Babylon. And so from the ashes of Babylon, Persepolis rises in a sense, which just goes from book 6 to book 7. Persepolis was also meant to be symbolic, and it was meant to be the throne of Jamshid. And Jamshid was a king from Iranian mythology. Just looking at the name Jamshid first, the etymology of it. Jamshid comes from Proto-Iranian, and it means majestic or brilliant twin. And when I think of majestic or brilliant twin in the context of the Expanse, I think about different civilizations, type of people. So I think of naturally the proto-molecule and the civilization that constructed it, and also the descendants of that, right? Humanity is in a sense using it now with the ring gates, and maybe a bit more, but also the thing that destroyed it. So on the one hand, the thing that destroyed it, and the other thing, the proto-molecule. And then if you look at the mythology and the folklore of Jamshid, Jamshid was this kind of god king type who commanded over both angels and demons. And it is said that Jamshid ruled for like 300 years very, very well. And so one, that's long life, which is very important to the villain here in Persepolis Rising, who is High Consul Duarte. Okay, he's trying to extend his life, and I'll talk to you more about that in a little bit. Also, he reigned well for 300 years, meaning like his citizens also had a prolonged life, and it was a very stable, productive, wonderful time apparently in folklore. And then it went to his head, and he started to think of himself as a god. So then that was the beginning of the end for Jamshid, even though he ended up reigning for like 700 years total. And once he was destroyed, civilization fell with it into a dark age. So I'm wondering here if this is all just foreshadowing for what is coming up for the last 2 books of the Expanse. I can't believe I am already 7 books in and there's only 2 to go. Craziness. Okay, so what is Persepolis Rising about? So it's been about 30 years since Admiral Winston Duarte and his Martian renegades supplied the Belter Marco Inaris, another fantastic villain from Nemesis Games and Babylon's Ashes, with MCRN ships and tech to build his free navy that he used to cripple the inner planets. So one reason Duarte had this such support from these Martians who had always been patriotic and just super pro-Mars is that the Martian dream was dying. So Martian citizens all worked together hoping to terraform Mars one day. And when the 1,300 new habitable worlds opened from the ring gates, well, that was the beginning of the end of their dream. So they really didn't have the same purpose anymore. They could just get a ship out and settle on one of the already more habitable planets than Mars. So after the devastation on Earth with the stealth-painted meteor strikes, those Martian terraformers were used on Earth to help repair the damages, okay, because Earth's ecosystems were decimated. So after 3 decades of struggle, Mother Earth was open for business. So at this point, Earth is no longer the most powerful entity in Sol system. And the aging Rosie crew are working for someone else, and they're working for basically the most powerful person at this time, the most influential person in the universe. And she's the president of the Transport Union, and she's in charge of travel and trade through the ring gates. And this person, Madame President, is Kamina Drummer. The Earth-Mars coalition had been the center of humanity once, the innermost of inners. Now it was an important spoke on the wheel whose hub was Medina Station, where the weird alien sphere sat in the middle of the knot space that linked all the ring gates. The vast alien intelligence that had engineered the ring gates and the massive ruins in the systems beyond them had found ways to manipulate distance, but the speed of light was the speed of light and seemed like it always would be. Anytime a few like-minded people could put together the resources for a colony and the fees for passage through the ring gates, the seeds of a new society sown out there among the stars. Even the most populous of the new systems had 8 or 10 cities on a whole planet. It was a massive parallel experiment in the possible forms of human collective, a chance to remake the structure of culture itself, but somehow it all ended up seeming very familiar. History was a cycle. Everything that had happened before, all the way back through the generations, would happen again. Sometimes the wheel turned quickly, sometimes it was slow. News feeds were where secular societies went to find out what cultural narratives were important and what could be ignored. There were thousands of feeds streaming right now, all around the system, with every variation of the ways to make sense of the history they were living through. In most, Laconia was an invading force to be resisted, but there were people who said Laconia was a liberating influence, an end to the oppression of the Earth-Mars coalition and the Transport Union. Or that they were the true spirit of Mars, betrayed by the old Congressional Republic and now returned in triumph, or that they were unbeatable and capitulation was the only choice. There was a certain peace in the impossibility of subterfuge. All right, it's character squares time. And I know this isn't quite accurate because this is the book 7 of The Expanse, so that means there's no season 7, unfortunately, of The Expanse TV series. So since Persepolis Rising is 30 years later, you're gonna have to imagine these characters a little bit older, but not quite 30 years older, because it sounds like in Persepolis Rising, everyone takes anti-aging meds, so maybe they've aged like physically like 10 years or so, so they don't look a lot older, even though the crew's now probably in their 60s and 70s. So unlike Babylon's Ashes, we do not get a million POVs. I think we had 19 POVs or something in Babylon's Ashes. I don't quite remember, but it was absolutely insane. So it's a more regular number of Expanse POVs. We got our prologue POV, our epilogue. We have 3 major characters plus kind of the Rocinante crew, I would say. Okay, so that's our perspective. So with the prologue, we get Paolo Cortazar. And if you have read any of the novellas and short stories, we met Paolo Cortazar in Vital Abyss, and Vital Abyss was told first person from his perspective. And it was really interesting to read, actually, because Cortazar had his empathy removed because he's a scientist, and he had his empathy removed so that he could work on the protomolecule, basically doing experiments on people, torturing them, turning them into vomit zombies and such, without feeling bad about it. Cortazar was taken by Martians to Laconia. He's the president of Laconia University and the head of the Exobiology Studies Lab there. And the really interesting thing that he's doing is he's like working on this protomolecule-based fountain of youth for High Consul Duarte, because just like I was talking about with Jamshid when I was talking about the etymology of Persepolis and what it could mean for this story, High Consul Duarte wants to live forever. And that brings me to the epilogue. So we get Duarte's POV only in the epilogue, though we do see him a little bit at the beginning of the story. Essentially, he wants to be ruler of the universe, a god king, though he won't call himself a god king. And he thinks that having one ruler is the only way forward toward a stable civilization or stable social order. So for Santiago Singh, I decided not to put a picture in, even though he was in The Expanse in season 6. He's a child in season 6. And this is like 30 years later. So he's like in his 30s somewhere. And so I didn't want it to be confusing having a picture of a child here because he's not one. We first met Singh in the novella Strange Dogs, which took place on Laconia. So he was raised on Laconia. He came there as a very young child. He experienced something very traumatic in Strange Dogs. And what actually shocked me about his character is either he has repressed this memory, but it never comes up in the book. And I was really hoping it would come up because I guess it could explain away some of his actions a little bit, but I just would have liked to see like one little thought about how he felt about that thing he experienced or witnessed or that happened in Strange Dogs. And like all Laconians, Singh is conditioned to be a true believer, and he does it well. He is in the Laconian Navy, so he's gone to the military academy there, and he has a wife and young daughter. And they refer to their daughter as Monster. And I thought this was a little bit weird because in SyFy, especially on a planet where strange stuff is happening, especially with the protomolecule, and if you've read Strange Dogs, you'll know a little bit more what I'm talking about. Reading that he calls this child Monster made me think that she was maybe this like hybrid Tim Burton-esque character child. Like I thought she was like something not quite human, something beyond human. And so I was really let down just to learn that she was a normal baby. But anyway, another thing I really didn't like about that is that, so Singh in his head was like pretty regularly just thinking of her as Monster, which is probably says a little bit something about him, I would say, or about his mentality. I mean, yeah, I refer to my cats sometimes as Gremlins, but that's only because I made the mistake of feeding them when it was really early one morning and dark out, and then you know how that goes. And to be honest, I'm lingering over his perspective because he's one of the new characters that we haven't gotten a POV from before. And his POV was the one that I had the hardest time reading in the book. He ends up being sent by High Consul Duarte to Medina Station to be the governor there. Okay, so that's really the source of tension in Persepolis Rising, this insurgency that's coming up. So yeah, I get why it made sense to have his perspective in the story. It was just my least favorite one to read, and I felt constantly frustrated by him. Like he just kept making these like frustrating decisions. And anyway, that was the least fun part. Moving on, I will not linger over him. I'm not gonna lie, I was really surprised to finally have the POV of Kamina Drummer. Like, this is the moment I've been waiting for like 7 books, 6 books, now 7. Okay, but anyway, I was just not expecting it to ever happen. Because in the TV series, we get Drummer and she absorbs Bull's storyline from Abaddon's Gate. She absorbs Michio Pa's storyline, who ends up being elevated to president of the Transport Union where we leave off in Babylon's Ashes. So now Drummer is president of the Transport Union. So I get where they were kind of going with that. And in my head, I remember all of that as Drummer. So like, she's more important to me than she probably should be, just like based on how she's written in the book. But anyway, we do get her POV, and she's older at this point. She's like in her 60s or 70s once again. And we meet her husband as well, Saba. In a way, she's quite similar to Holden in that she is a very reluctant leader, but she's much more introspective than Holden. I think most people are. Holden's not very introspective, but I'm not gonna lie, I'm quite attached to him at this point. So did enjoy Drummer's parts, but not as much as the Rocinante crew member parts, because I'm still more attached to them because I've known them for longer in the books, even though I really enjoy Drummer's character in the TV series. And I know that there's like this feedback where she's imposed over the character who she is in the book in my mind. So she's like more meaningful to me than I think someone coming into this book without knowing her from the TV series would be. And so the Rocinante crew is now, they're aging, of course, like everyone here. And they're working as the muscle for President Drummer. And so basically she sends them on little missions through the ring gates to take care of stuff that she needs taken care of. And at the point where we meet up with Holden and the rest of the crew, who's 6 strong now, because we have Holden, Naomi, Amos, Alex, Bobby now, and Clarissa. Clarissa goes by Claire at this point, and also Amos still calls her Peaches. So when we meet the crew, they are going to this planet Freehold to take care of some stuff, and Holden is starting to, I don't even think he's thinking about it. Naomi's starting to think about retirement. She's the one that puts it in his head because he's not really thinking too much about it. He's kind of just reacts to it. So Naomi and Holden are starting to consider retiring, which is a crazy, crazy big deal. It's like, no, don't. They have to stick it out for the rest of the series. Don't do this to me. I'm attached to them. Don't take Holden away from me now, even though like it took me a while to get attached to his character in the book. I don't know what I'd do without having his comfortable like POV, like it's so comfy to me now, taken away. And I really like this line about Holden's character because this is definitely Holden in a nutshell. Holden had always been the one who soaked up the fame and celebrity because for the most part he didn't notice it. He just kept on being himself and got vaguely surprised when anyone recognized him. And Holden is not the major Rocinante POV that you get in the book, actually. You get more Bobby than you get Holden. So if you are a big fan of the former Martian Marine, even though she still has her power armor, and Alex has named her power armor Betsy, I really like the Alex-Bobby relationship. They're like BFFs, and it's super adorable. And they're thinking about how they're going to grow old together, even though they don't have this romantic relationship. And I like that part of the story as well. But you do get a lot of Bobby. You get the rest of the crew here and there. And I think, even though the crew has aged, one of the limitations, I think, is how static their aging was internally. So these characters are not very different in like their thought processes from where we left off with them 30 years ago. Not that much has changed. The only thing that's changed is they have some more aches and pains. And when we're thinking about aches and pains, really the one suffering the most is Clarissa, because remember, she had that piece of tech, that mod embedded in her brain that enabled her to Hulk out. And well, the thing is, the mod is starting to malfunction and it can't be removed from her brain without killing her. So it's like leaking this poison into her body, and she has to get her blood flushed now periodically. And I think one of the best chapters, one of the most well-done chapters in the book is the one told from Clarissa's perspective. She only gets one chapter, but it's phenomenal. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly go through a few things that I liked. And right at the beginning of the book, we learn that the vomit zombies are back. And we have not had vomit zombies since Leviathan Wakes. So I'm really excited to see where that goes. And also, I really like that the Laconians are these new Martians that are just way more intense, way more strict, and like, oh gosh, they make super villains. Okay, even Singh, he's like trying to do like the right Laconian thing, and it just comes out like so messed up. And oh gosh, I love the Laconian spaceships, these weird hybrid, like kind of like biological but mechanical spaceships that are like ancient sea creatures that came from the depths of Earth. So cool. And their names are also like remnant of this. Like one is called the Heart of the Tempest. Like, whoo. The other is the Gathering Storm. And the Heart of this Tempest is like a freaking Star Destroyer. It's so insane. But anyway, I don't know if these ships come up at all in season 6. I've only watched the first episode so far of it. But I would just love to see these like sea creature ships on the screen. I think those are awesome. I really like the tension that emerges from the difficulty of communication over these vast distances. First from light delay, but then also just like the difficulty getting data through the Sol Ring Gate into Medina Station, okay? Because there's noise, there's other things going on there. Okay, and there's this thing that popped into my head when I was reading that was not really important to this book, but I'm just going to share it with you because I think it's pretty perfect and it's an analogy. And I think that the Roci crew members are to Avasarala as Harry Potter and his friends are to Dumbledore. I think definitely just like getting into trouble, kind of doing these things they shouldn't be doing, but like, it's always okay in the end. 10 points to Gryffindor. The Roci crew members always get like special treatment. I love that. And I'll probably talk about this again in my wrap-up video after I finish reading. Okay, and then lastly, and this was a big one for me in this book, I absolutely loved the ending. It was everything I've been waiting for and hoping for, and I just hope moving forward this does not let me down. This is exactly what I wanted from this series. We get it at the very, very end of this book, and it's just everything I wanted. And not beyond that. Like, I wanted more. Okay? So, read it all the way to the end, please. All right, so what didn't I like? Like Babylon's Ashes, I thought there was some issues in the middle with pacing. And it was just largely that the whole insurgency, uprising on Medina Station, I thought the coordination of that just was too dragged out in addition to Singh's security efforts against it. But that was really it with the plotting. On more little nitpicky scientific details, this is my problem. It's probably not going to be a problem for most people, but it has to do with remote sensing. And early on in the book, on like page 8, Cortazar is going through the security system on Laconia, and he can kind of feel the hum or whatever of the X-rays and millimeter waves like going over him. So for one, it depends on how you interpret this, but either way, I still have some like issues with it. I know. So X-rays, the wavelength associated with X-rays is about a nanometer. Not a millimeter. Like, so a nanometer is like a million times smaller than a millimeter. Okay, that's one. But I know that it's maybe not saying X-rays are millimeter waves. But if you're going to say X-rays, which are like nanometer waves, then you might as well say what gives off millimeter waves, like infrared or microwaves, like depending on where you are in the spectrum, okay? If you're thinking a millimeter or larger, like a couple millimeters would be microwaves, or a millimeter or like a little smaller would be the infrared part of the spectrum. So say X-rays and microwaves, or nanometer waves and millimeter waves. Okay, I'm done with that. But there is one more remote sensing issue that I had, and I'm gonna try to reason it out and talk through it with you. So to begin with, I'm just going to read a passage. I'm not going to tell you where in the story it comes from because I really don't want to give anything away, but I think out of context, this is okay. As you can see, the anomaly doesn't seem to exist as a physical object. It doesn't appear to radiate on any wavelength, except for the visible spectrum photons. No one sensing device aimed at it can even tell that it's there, but we can record it and see it just fine. Being in the same room with it, looking at it, it's quite disorienting and causes double vision and severe headaches. Okay, so I'm gonna give some benefit of the doubt here. But before that, I'm gonna break down some stuff, okay? So our eyeballs. Yes, they are remote sensors. They can sense things. And if we're able to see, if everyone's able to see something in the visible spectrum, some other remote sensing device should be able to pick up that data. Okay, but let's just try to give the benefit of the doubt here and think about perception. And to illustrate, I'm going to use an example. So maybe you remember back in 2015, there was this dress meme that went around like, oh, what color is the dress? Some people were convinced it was white and gold. Other people were convinced that it was blue and black. And people got in all these arguments like, oh, you're wrong and all this stuff. But there's recently been an article that came out in Wired that I read the other day, which is why this is fresh in my mind. And I've linked the article below if you want to read it as well. And so basically, the world as you experience it is this simulation running in your skull. It's some kind of self-generated illusion or perception, whatever. There's this chain of visual processing that takes place where the data that you get inputted into your eyeballs, it takes like from your eyeballs to the neurons in your brain, there's like 30 steps in visual processing. And the way that we see things, the way that we see color, is really light that's reflected off an object. So it's odd, but seeing, in a sense, is a subjective experience because of this, okay? Because your brain, the neurons in your brain can interpret the information from the photoreceptors in your eyes in these different ways. So the most illustrative example of this are called intrapersonal bistable illusions, okay? So here's a couple examples of them, and they're probably familiar to you, okay? And so there's two possible ways of interpreting each of these images, okay? And it just depends really on your past experiences, how your brain interprets it. So for example, here I see a duck, and here I see a young woman. Okay, and the same thing happens with the color of the dress, okay, because your mind constructs what we see from these past experiences. And so when researching why people saw this dress and these two different color patterns, what it turns out is those people who lived more of their life in natural light saw the dress as gold and white, whereas those people who lived more of their day in artificial light saw it as blue and black. So I see the dress as yellow and gold, and it makes sense. I've spent a lot of my time outdoors doing field work. I always have lights dimmed with the windows, like totally makes sense. It just really depends on your experience. And the thing is, the dress in person is actually blue and black. So the blue and black people did have it right. And my point here is still, maybe this artifact in the Expanse that people were seeing was something that was constructed in their mind. But then the thing that doesn't make sense is why could you then see it on camera? So I don't know. I think it's kind of an issue. Or maybe my brain is just not evolved enough to think about it because this is a future and there are aliens involved. So I'll let you make the decision there. Okay, so I'm going to try to do this so efficiently. For story, I rated it an 8 out of 10. So the story comes around full circle. And as I mentioned earlier, it is a bit draggy at times, but I did actually, while I said that orchestrating the insurgents part got a little draggy, the very start of it I found so exciting. And then the ending. The ending was awesome. So solid 8 out of 10. Not too bad. Characters, I also rated an 8 out of 10 just because the characters just felt static to me. I thought they should have changed a little more in 30 years. Maybe they could reflect some more on some of the like more important experiences that they've had in their lives over that time. Like, yeah, I know Alex got married again and had a kid, but like doesn't think about it that much. He's divorced again. So there's that, but it didn't change who he was. He's in exactly the same place that he was last time we met him, for example. So there's not a lot of internal change that has happened. And also, and I know in life, not everything is resolved, but it just really, it's irking me not to know if anything ever came of Philip. Just saying. Maybe he'll come around later in the future and it better, but I know that's not realistic technically, but I wanted to, and I think as readers, we deserve to know. Okay, next piece. Prose. I think starting with Abaddon's Gate, like the prose just was phenomenal, and it leveled up significantly from Caliban's War to Abaddon's Gate, and then it's just stuck there. Okay, so it's a solid 9 out of 10 again, I'd say, for prose. Originality, I rated an 8.5 out of 10 because a lot of the stuff that happened in Persepolis Rising felt kind of familiar to me. It felt a little bit about some things that we've had happened like on Medina Station before. We didn't get a lot of new scenery, which also made, so for world building, I did rate it a 9.5 out of 10. As I would have liked more exploration of Laconia and Freehold. And I just thought, originality-wise, I loved where the story got to, but I would have liked to explore all that a little bit sooner. Okay, so overall, I rated this an 8.6 out of 10. So that would be in the middle of the pack for the Expanse. Okay, so solid. Of course, I'm going to keep going. I'm this far in, and I really want to see what happens now. Like it leaves you on a cliffhanger, which is like, no, I want to just keep reading this, but I'm not going to because I have other things I need to read or would like to read. I need to experience some stuff in between. Okay, so the next thing on my agenda after Oberon is continuing the Coldfire trilogy, which I love and am really excited to do. If you want to keep up with our reviews and discussions on iWizard, please subscribe and click that notification bell. And please visit us on patreon.com/iWizard if you like what we do and you want to help us out a little bit. So until next time, bye.